Hey, it's Tim here. In today's video, I want to talk about social networks and Tableau. As ever, let's get stuck in. So the Tableau community has mostly found itself on Twitter. Twitter has been the one place when I was learning Tableau. Twitter was the platform to have a profile and communicate with everyone doing anything interesting in the Tableau space. Very quickly after that, I also discovered that the community forums, Tableau's own community forums, were another great place to go and find people who could not only help, but give some pretty detailed answers and breakdowns to solutions and problems that you might have. And I still recommend those two resources as a place to go and find innovation, inspiration, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But there's one big problem with social networks at the moment. And right now, there's actually a very interesting situation going on with Reddit, which has sort of prompted me to make this video. I should have also made a video when Twitter had its own range of problems. But at that time, I just thought, that was a little bit unnecessary. But I think now that we've had a repeat instance of social networks going rogue, I think it's time that we start to ask the question, should Tableau make an effort to create a space in the social universe that it owns, it manages, and most importantly, it moderates? Let's talk a bit about that. You know, you might be asking, well, what's the point? What's the point? Everything's fine on Twitter. People are still using Twitter. People are still using Reddit. Well, what's the point? Well, the point here is this. When you're a company like Tableau and you are operating in a space that you ultimately don't control, as in Twitter, you don't control the APIs, you don't control the platform, essentially someone else, another company, another organization with, quite frankly, needs that need to meet the whole world can make platform decisions that fundamentally change the nature and the way in which your community functions on that platform. One of the downsides with, Twitter and its changes in most recent months has been they killed a bunch of APIs. So if, let's say, a part of your community was using Twitter through third-party apps as Tableau, what you'd see is a side effect that people would just stop communicating on Twitter as much. It stopped going onto Twitter as much. And I have to say, I track various social media metrics on Twitter. And since the last 3 months, Twitter's just fallen off a cliff. People are not using it. And the people who are still using it were the people that were the vocal minority, as it were. But frankly, people just aren't consuming Twitter anymore. I'll even show you some YouTube stats. Twitter contributes less than 0.001% of traffic to pretty much all of the activity that goes on my channel. See, when I share something on Twitter, you'd think a lot of people would go and see the video. Actually, the reality is, if I share a video on Twitter and let's say 200 people like the post, in reality, only 10 people are likely to actually go and watch the video. So it's also sort of plays into this effect that you see on Twitter where it starts to become an echo chamber where we all post something, we like and reshare, but actually how many people are actually, validating what's being shared, whether it's good or not, or we just supporting each other in this sort of effort to sort of amplify the message. Those two things can kind of get sort of blurred out. So, Twitter's had this issue. And so I just stopped using Twitter. You'll notice I've just stopped using Twitter as much. I don't honestly, want to post on Twitter much because at the same time, the owner of the platform and the way that people behave on the platform has also led me to dislike the way it works. Quite honestly, I get so much more interesting engagement and comments on YouTube comments where I have a much bigger presence because the people there value the content and they value sort of the feedback. On Twitter, you do get into this sort of shouting match sometimes, and it sometimes does sort of bring out the worst in some debates and the worst in some discussions. And you also sort of get this element where the platform sort of cultivates a specific type of community. It's really hard on Twitter to have a community that becomes really vibrant, meets up weekly and does a bunch of things. What people tend to do is they tend to share resources to things like user groups. They tend to share resources to other platforms to go and do those things. So it ends up just becoming this sort of place where things move really quickly. And to new audiences, Twitter's just, archaic in many ways. The generation of tomorrow, if I look at my brother who's 10 years younger than me, he doesn't spend time on Twitter. They don't spend time on social networks. So if you're also thinking about the future of the people who are going to be using your product, Twitter is just not a good place to be. Now, you might say, okay, well, we have Tableau forums, we have all these other places. Well, what's wrong with those? Well, here's another problem with these. Frankly, people don't know they exist, and you have to use the platforms for quite some time to stumble into someone that will tell you that these places exist. A simple good example is when people suggest ideas, they say, well, Tableau should do this. And I always go to people, hey, do you know that Tableau has a place where you can make a suggestion? And they don't know that. And then I'll send them a link and they'll go to the link and they'll see, oh, wow, this thing I've had in my mind has actually been in the community's ideas page for the last 8 years. And only recently have Tableau started sort of knocking some of those off. But nonetheless, they don't realize that this is happening. And so what that does is it changes the dynamic. When you know something has been asked for 8 years, you have a very different kind of relationship with the vendor, because what you want to now do is sort of play an accountable role with the vendor and say, hey, why hasn't this feature been developed? Instead, you kind of come at this from this approach where you're thinking, oh, why? Well, this is such an obvious thing. Why isn't it in the product? And you start to critique the product as if no one has ever thought of the idea. But actually, that leads to a very different discussion to just, holding Tableau to critique. The other thing is that forums just aren't a dynamic that many people enjoy. And I hate to say that because forums are incredibly useful. I've said it at the beginning of this video, I'll say it again. The kind of help and the kind of value you'll find in the Tableau forums is of really exceptional quality. But if you try and introduce, again, generation of today, a younger generation, my brother, who's 10 years younger than me, to something like a forum and the way a forum works, it's just too slow. The idea that you create sort of a post in a thread, that's all happening on much, much more real-time platforms. For those, we're talking things like Slack and Discord. And again, people just look at those platforms and they don't want to create a Salesforce account to have to use that. They don't want to have to, traverse the search. They don't want to have to understand its structure. And the forums aren't always set up in like the most sort of transparent way. In fact, the best way to experience forums is to not browse the forums, is to search for something and then add the term Tableau forums, and you'll get what you want really, really quickly. They also come up because when solutions get posted, sometimes it's a community forum post that's actually answering the question where there is no knowledge base or no sort of central point. So I think it's pretty interesting that Tableau, a company that's been around for 20 years, yes, was forward thinking when it had forums. Yes, was forward thinking when it built its community on Twitter. But you have to ask, the Tableau of the future, the Tableau that was at the keynote, the Tableau that's looking ahead to a dashboard-less feature, the Tableau that wants more and more people to come and engage, if they want developers, if they want this kind of community to come and get involved, you got to ask, well, where is that community? And that's when we get to actually a really interesting opportunity here that I think is just blindingly obvious. But yeah, it's quite simple. It's Slack. So Salesforce own Tableau. Salesforce also owns Slack. Now, Slack, bizarrely, is one of the most well-respected community platforms on the planet. As an analyst, I can't tell you how many different Slacks I'm part of that, to me, just foster a much more vibrant, much more dynamic, much more reactive community. Yes, on Twitter, you can post something and get something back, but what you get on Slack is just of a higher quality level because things are threaded, things are organized in a much better way. And I know there's lots of people who hate certain dynamics within Slack, but honestly, Slack's integrations and the way Slack works compared to pretty much everything else are second to none. And so once people get over that dynamic, once people sort of figure out how that dynamic works, the one thing Slack lets you do is customize your own experience, which is one feature that forums and Twitter don't really let you do. And another thing Slack does, it lets you build and scale your community in a way that works. And the irony here is that Salesforce has the power to do this for its own communities. And to me, it's just the most obvious place. But we also have a official place on Reddit, and we have an official place pretty much everywhere on all the key platforms. Now, the thing with Reddit, and I don't think Reddit is going to really be impacted. Tableau Reddit won't be impacted by the most recent API changes, but I think it sort of speaks to this point again, where the platform owner is changing the way and the dynamic in which people work with Reddit. And the other thing I have to say about Reddit is actually the Tableau Reddit itself. This is not a criticism. This is, Reddit has a very specific identity. And because of that, you have roles called moderators, and they decide how a particular group works. And the reason they're in that role is because they know what works, and they're trying to sort of stop the bad side of the internet coming through. And so one of the things with the Tableau Reddit is you can't do self-promotion. You might think, yeah, well, that's good. Actually, that's really a good thing. Why would you allow people to self-promote? Well, the problem is that when people build build something and they want to share it, or they make something they're proud of, they want to be able to share it. I made a video explaining Tableau that's now had 600,000 views. Now, when I posted that video initially, I wanted to get it out to as many people as possible, and I put it in the Reddit, and it actually ranked to the top ranking post that week. But unfortunately, it got sort of removed by the moderators because ultimately I was doing self-promotion. So what I really needed was for someone else to go and post the video. But why would someone else post the video if they don't know about it? So it's kind of it's a strange thing when you want to do some good, but the way to do it is to kind of, have a sort of a backdoor way. And I just thought, well, that's a weird dynamic. I don't want to have to do this every time I post a video. So I just gave up. And so that's why you probably don't find people sharing their work and their resources on somewhere like Reddit, but you get more of a discussion. And then what ends up happening is that the valuable sort of knowledge ends up sort of coalescing away from those places, and it becomes sort of slightly lessly used. So what point am I trying to make? Well, ultimately, Tableau have a platform that they could use that's owned by Salesforce. I say Tableau. I should just really stop saying Tableau and just say Salesforce. Salesforce have a platform they own. It's called Slack. Slack could be an incredible place, not just for the Tableau community, but it could also be an incredible place for bringing all of its communities. We're talking about the Slack community itself, which runs on Slack, surprise, surprise. We're talking about the Salesforce MVP program, that could also run on Slack. And we're talking about the Tableau community program, which could also run on Slack. In fact, if you're part of those community programs, you do get invited to the internal Slack space for the company, Tableau. But here's the thing. I think it's somewhat of a limited experience because we don't have a place for other people in the community to openly come in and take part in it. We don't have a place for these discussions and threads to take place in a much bigger setup. And so what you get there is essentially a misrepresentation of the wider community base. And I think this is what sort of speaks to some of the disconnect that you get at conference. You see Tableau going on with the cloud, saying that the cloud is the biggest product. This is where people are pushing. And what we get internally sometimes is this idea about, oh, where's server? Where's server going? And that's because fundamentally, a lot of the people who've been using the core product are still on server, but actually a lot of the new customers are on Tableau Cloud, but they're not in that Slack. They're not represented as much. So you get this sort of disconnect. So I really do think something like Slack would be a fundamentally amazing addition to open it up, to create a Tableau community Slack where not only can we communicate directly with Tableau, not only can we communicate with each other, but we could have threads about certification. We could have threads about visualizations. A visit of the day feed could be in there. We could have people being tagged on lots of different threads. We could have even videos from the community, blog posts from the community being dynamically shared and entered into a specific feed automatically. So you add yourself to a form. We actually have a weekly post called This Week in Tableau, and it has a bunch of different posts that could all be automated without needing to sort of have someone manually put it together. All these automations already exist in other communities. And I have to say the community I sort of like to refer to as the DBT community. Whilst it's fairly quiet in the Tableau channel, I actually enjoy just reading the threads in other channels. I'm one of these people that just sort of sits quietly in pretty much all communities. I just read the content. I form my own opinions. I disagree passionately with most of it, but I just don't share them because I think, sometimes we'll only share something if you're willing to actually take action and push for that outcome and fight for that outcome. And so if you're not willing to do that, what's the point in sharing? You kind of gotta choose your battles wisely. So I talk when I'm really passionate about something. And so for everything else, for 99% of stuff, I'm just looking on, making opinions, forming my own judgments, and sort of enjoying the content that way. But anyway, I think Tableau, Salesforce should seriously consider a community Slack. And why am I making this video? Well, I've started to believe in life that if you want something to happen, you kind of have to put it out there. You have to put the idea out there as a way of manifesting it yourself. I'm not into manifestation, but I do think that when you start to socialize ideas, people start thinking, and you never know, the ideas might just end up somewhere useful. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.